Hello, and welcome to our sixth episode of Arts for Mental Health podcast with your host, Asha Ponnachan, in collaboration with Madhura Geetam. Today, we have in studio with us our guest, Jenna Dolly, who is a social worker, a therapist, a community development expert, and she has her own private practice called Elevated Shifts that helps individuals and families with their therapeutic services. And she does all this while being a mother of two young children. So, if you want to learn about the balance between personal life and professional life, who better to talk to? Thank you, Jenna Dolly, for joining us here today in studio.
Thank you for having me. I am looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully we can bring some insights to what work-life balance means, what it means to be your authentic self while also pursuing your goals, and just the realness of the struggle of trying to coordinate all of those things all at the same time.
Yes, all at the same time being key. As we do with every guest, would you like to start off by taking us on a journey of your own mental health and how you got into all of these things?
Yeah, sure. As I reflect on that question around, my journey through mental health, I really think that it is a beautiful, complex mess that where the personal and professional collide. For me, my social work journey actually started in high school when a guidance counselor actually directed me to apply for the social work program. I knew a lot about myself, some of the skills that I had, but I didn't know what that would translate into a career. And she was like, "Why don't you try social work?" And 15 plus years later, I haven't looked back. But in that educational experience, I had to always consistently apply a critical and intersectional lens to the study and field of practice of social work, because I was always finding that my experience wasn't captured. It was definitely not in the textbooks.
So you mean, could you elaborate on your experience, the phrase your experience?
Yeah, it's about understanding my identity and the intersectionality between those identities. So being a Black woman, having immigrant parents, but also being Canadian born, growing up predominantly in a Christian household. All of these experiences come together to form like who you are. And then in social work, you're really learning about the systems of oppressions, the ways in which people navigate society, how they look at their basic needs and how do they get them met. And in that exploration, I always found that I had to sort of put my hand up and kind of say, but like my experiences, or because of this, this is different for me. And that really fostered my commitment, I think, to exploring mental health in various ways from the lenses of various people, and making sure that that was an inclusive experience for folks.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this earlier as well. Even when it comes to physical health or exercises or workouts or mental health, a lot of the services that are provided and are out there, the systems that are out there, aren't really curated to a racialized community. And we were talking about how I had to relearn working out because what I knew of workouts was from a different community or different genetic makeup. And so a lot of these things, when it comes to our own health, we are still learning from the perspective of racialized communities or people from people of color communities. So keeping that in mind as a social worker and therapist, what would you say are the most common mental health issues that people bring up to you?
Hmm. I think there are a few, and I just want to note that like everyone's experiences is different, and so I will talk a little bit in general terms, but know that there's complexity and intricate ways in which this plays out for individual people. But some of the common circumstances and conditions that I help folks work through is burnout. So that could be like
Mm,
heavy workloads, a lack of resources in your workplace, or systemic issues labeled as like a personal failure, and
mm,
the lack of recognition of that in the workplace that really uh, um, wears a person down to the point where they are incapable of continuing their daily functioning and their routines. We also see chronic stress and anxiety,
mm.
and that is usually tied to like rising expectations without proper supports. Again, coming from an intersectional lens, that can also be layered in based on how you identify. And so, if you are from a more historically marginalized population or community, your stress and anxiety can look different, show up differently, depending on how your workplace culture is as well too. So there's that layer, and then there's depression or like low morale that I often see folks experience. So that's like a toxic work culture, could be a lack of recognition, maybe there's a lack of job security, and so folks feel the pressure to appear fine when they're
Mm,
not.
mm.
And over time, that can compound to really impact a person's mental well-being and mental health, and sometimes even lead to, when it's chronic enough and consistent and persistent, to actual mental illness.
Right. So you mentioned, and I throw these curveballs to every guest who comes.
No
I will
problem.
send them a list of questions and then ask them something I have not told them. You mentioned the appearance of feeling, or appearance of being fine,
Yeah.
as opposed to actually sharing what the actual issues are. Do you think this is more common among people of color? Because I know, at least from the South Asian community, there is a certain culture of shame associated with not doing really well. If you're not excelling at stuff, or if someone else is doing better and you're not, there's a certain um, idea of shame, of less than, of on it's an honor and shame culture.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that that plays into this whole complexity of wanting to appear fine,
Yep.
everything's fine?
Yep. I like to kind of give the analogy of like a backpack, and everybody's got stuff in their backpack. And when you get to work, the expectation is that you take the backpack off and you put it down. But you can't do that in real life because all of those things are attached to you, all of those experiences, all of those identities are attached to you consistently, and they're constantly interacting. And so the ability to not, the ability to expect people to take off their backpack and then having to perform that in the workplace is really stressful. And then when you talk a little bit about like the culture of shame and things like that, there's a word that a lot of racialized people um, uh, do, and it's called code switching. And
Mm,
so you come into a space and you assess your safety. And
mm,
sometimes your safety requires you to speak differently. Sometimes your
mm,
safety requires you to look differently.
mm.
Sometimes negotiating your safety. And this is like psychological safety, or this could be your physical
Yes,
safety as well, too.
yes,
Emotional well-being, all the versions of safety, right? And so you have to code switch, you have to change, you have to adapt, you have to fit in, and that takes away from you not being able to be your authentic self. And the less that you get to perform or be your authentic self, the disconnect between yourself and reality and grounding yourself in real things becomes more and more evident.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the backpack, essentially, for many of us, is something that is like our arm or our leg or a foot. It's part of our body,
Yeah.
because it is, we are so ingrained in this culture,
Yep.
as is everybody in their own cultures. And the whole definition of culture is an assimilation of everything that is around us and in our environment. So essentially, if you have to take off the backpack, you'd have to do surgery and cut off that.
And so can you imagine like the moral injury that it does for yourself when you want to be, show up, present, share your hardships, your struggles, your feelings, all of those things in a space that doesn't allow for that to happen? Like the moral injury it does to you every day, and depletes you because you can't bring that into space. So then folks try to navigate that by doing other things outside the workplace, and then that's where this work-life balance comes into play. But if you're struggling, here, and then you try to meet all your needs over here, it becomes another sort of vicious cycle where you just don't feel like you're catching up. You don't feel well. And so that's something that I try to illuminate for folks um, in therapy sessions, right? Around, how do we, one, just pause for a moment so we can understand the lay of the land, like what's happening for you right now, what needs to stay, what needs to continue, what needs to stop, and what do you need to start.
Yeah. Jenna, you're probably going to get a lot more curveballs than many of my other guests got just because you are actually bringing up a lot of stuff. So, you are the child of immigrant parents. I am a first generation immigrant. And do you think among immigrant families, and a lot of our audience are immigrant families, um, there is this idea of the pressure to do better just because of the hardship. So, like
Mm,
your parents came here, so do you have a pressure to do really well because they made some sacrifice? Or people in my circumstances as well, they have there's this perhaps unspoken pressure to do really, really well just because you have made that journey across the oceans to come to a new place. And now, for some reason, you have to prove uh,
mm-hmm.
that this was all well worth it.
Yeah. I definitely hear that narrative quite a bit. Breaking that down, that sometimes can be a really harmful narrative that sometimes older generations may put on younger generations that
Mm.
then become pressure points for them. And it often, if there isn't conversations or new ways of thinking and doing things, yeah, can really impact an individual and their mental health. And then there's the other side of that where there's pride, right, and being able to I guess stand on the shoulders of your ancestors and do more with what you have now than they did. And so, that conversation can happen in two ways. So I really want to acknowledge like both sides, the complexity of that, right? There's the one side where I'm like, oh, it feels like too much. Then the other side is like, yeah, but knowing what I know about what my people went through, I'm really fortunate and privileged to be able to have these opportunities. So it's about having those conversations. One thing I really do want to say sometimes too is that intergenerational conversations are so important. I have a 90-year-old grandmother who immigrated from Barbados to England to Canada, and very rarely have I heard her speak. Like, she was born in 1935, right? So at a time when, there was a ton of racial discrimination and divide and, towards Black people, and laws and policies that were, embedded in our systems to promote that. And I rarely hear her talk about her experiences, but I know that it was incredibly difficult. And sometimes she gives me glimpses of just how bad it was. And it's those little deposits that sometimes in my hardest moments I can think back on and really say, okay, yeah, I can position this a little bit differently. So all that to say is that I think each generation has the opportunity to teach another generation something new, and that we just need to be open to listen and hear from each other, because it's all valuable. But sometimes, as younger generations don't get to hear the stories because they're that painful, and they want to, shield you from, those experiences. But also, there's a younger generation coming up that is speaking out, that is making changes, that is doing community development in a different way, that is demanding workplace cultures to be different. And so that also needs to be communicated, heard, and shared amongst older generations.
Well, thank you very much, Jenna. On that note, we'll give this two key takeaways from this episode. One being intergenerational storytelling. We, as people of color, as people who've immigrated here, or children of people who have immigrated here, we bring a wealth of knowledge and experiences and art forms and many other forms of creativity with us. So let's use that to speak through our generations, learn from the previous generations, and learn from every other generation that's coming after us, and help teach each other the good things that we can. And the art form in there is storytelling. So keep your stories alive and keep your stories spoken and heard with the hope to heal. Thank you.